Let's just say, GA, he's gonna have a lot of time in his hands from now on. You know what time it is? Time for clock puns, because we're talking about the Clock King. There was a Clock King reveal, a Temple Fugate version, over in a Tom King miniseries ongoing, time of recording. It's the Killing Time, which name is starting to sound more and more apt by the issue. And it put me in the mood to talk about the Clock King. But then the question became, which one? We could have a clock list. There are several Clock Kings, and time of recording there seems to be a couple of active ones. So when in doubt, start at the beginning. We're going classic Clock King. And his very out there Silver Age costume, but his very dark and gritty Bronze Age origin. We're going to be taking a look at Wyndham Tockman, a character who was used very little pre-crisis and a bit more post, who would be supplanted by other versions, none of whom would really take a firm hold themselves. But he would thrive in adaptation, both past and modern. So just what was the Clock King story, and why at the start did he have it out for Green Arrow? Yes, Clock King started off life as a Green Arrow villain. Score one for the Arrowverse, keeping it accurate. I'm Sasha, and this is Casually Comics, the channel where we chat all things comics, from reviews, comics new and old, to history to anecdotes, to really wherever our whims take us. The Clock King first debuted in World's Finest number 11 in the third tale. So not in the story from the cover, which goes about how one can imagine Superman accidentally becomes king of a lost native tribe. No Clock King here. For that we need the story Green Arrow, Crimes of the Clock King, written by Ed Herron with art by Lee Elias. This story is from the year 1960. He's gonna start off here deep in the Silver Age, but he's not gonna get a proper origin until the Bronze, in a story that's gonna recontextualize this one. So our first outing sees us dealing with classic beardless Green Arrow. He was still very much embroiled in totally not being Batman. Ignore the arrow symbol, the arrow car, the child sidekick, the rich alter ego. Shh, he's different. He's blonde and he has arrows. You've heard of many kinds of clock. You're assuming a lot about me, narrator, but go on. But did you ever hear of a clock that not only runs but walks as well? No, this is not a riddle. No, the Riddler is busy. He has Batman to bother, and Ollie would probably just leave him hanging. The teaser for this story doesn't get a whole page, but rather a panel of Speedy and Green Arrow trapped in an hourglass where the sand descends into spikes. We open on a masquerade ball where the Clock King is not standing out, even in his flamboyant costume. Hey, look at that guest. I bet he always knows what time it is. I want to know what the theme was, or was it just anything goes? This next panel, the way he's standing directly above the clock, it makes him look like he's wearing a giant clock, Flava Flav style. He's actually planning to steal the jewelry off of the woman at the party. But he claims with their masks on, he can't identify them. But they're wearing the jewelry on their necks and their wrists, but you know what? He can't do it. He needs them to take their masks off, but they're only supposed to do that at midnight. But he's timed his escape to be exactly at midnight, so what to do? He sets the clocks forward a minute and also turns off the light. Why would they unmask in the dark? And now he can't see where the jewels are anyway. I guess he has night vision inside of his clock head. And security sees him escaping out the window anyway and sends out the arrow signal. Maybe he should have given himself more than 1 minute for the snatch and grab. The thing with the arrow signal is they phrase it like it's an arrow that they launch off the top of the police headquarters. So I guess if Ollie isn't glued to the window, he misses it. If that happens, there's this SOL. However, him and Speedy see this one, so they rush off the scene of the crime. And the Clock King is still there, despite him saying he was leaving at midnight. And he's timed with the figures of a giant cuckoo clock, so it's legit been a minute. I guess Green Arrow lives close by. He wasn't invited to this masquerade, he was bitter. The Clock King escapes by putting his costume on one of the clock figurines. And Ollie says there are no clues, time to go home. The Clock King then launches on a crime spree, stealing from all the fine time-themed establishments of what I'm just going to assume is Star City. I wonder what kind of place the TikTok Club is. Did you notice that every one of his jobs has to do with time? Thanks, Speedy. But for his next crime, he wants to steal some art. Thankfully, there's a clock shop right next door, so he sets up to look like he's robbing that. But Green Arrow sees through this ruse, cause a little too obvious. How is this more obvious than the Minuteman Bank? So they catch him mid-crime and he leads them on a merry chase to his pretty impressive clock-themed lair. The giant clock face on the floor is the trapdoor to the evil hourglass. But he wasn't prepared for his camp to be matched by Green Arrow's. Spiky sand trap meet suction arrow. Green Arrow suctions himself out and then they capture the Clock King. Let's just say, GA, he's gonna have a lot of time in his hands from now on. Nice one, Roy. Up top. Man, Tockman looks sad here, but if you notice, he wasn't named. He was always just called Clock King. The name will come later. This is your standard filler outing. It is very by the numbers, by rote as it were. It's not very deep, you could write it in your sleep. And the villain theme is there because it's 1960 and villains have themes. There's not much to the Clock King here. What stands out about him is his admittedly outrageous costume, but not much else. But there's something there, the concept of playing with time, but it's not gonna be mine just yet. He could easily have been in One and Done, but he crops back up. First briefly in Justice League number 5 in 1961, even though in this outing he's misnamed. They call him King Clock. Green Arrow is right there and doesn't correct him. Guess it was that memorable for him. I guess Gardner Fox, the writer, and Julius Schwartz, the editor, couldn't be bothered. Schwartz would go on to become quite a noteworthy editor, but one of his hallmarks was clamping down on silly, or what he deemed silly. This largely revolved around gimmick characters. However, before he's in a head editor position, sometimes you'll see things like this, where for sillier stories, it feels like less care is employed because of a general annoyance over the level of silly. Clock King, King Clock, same thing, except not. This story is far more noteworthy for being the first appearance of Dr. Destiny, who infiltrates the Justice League by impersonating Hal Hal Jordan. Why would Hal Jordan do this? The Clock King, or King Clock as they call him in the story, then vanishes for over a decade, reappearing in 1979. This time back in World's Finest in issue 257, once more in the third story. It's called Time Keeps on Killing. This one's by Paul Cooperberg with art by Jose Delbo, inks by Frank McLaughlin, colors by Jerry Serb. This story is entirely narrated through the eyes of a worker, Nate Peterson. There's a very specific reason why they appear to be doing this. One of the distinctions that began to be drawn between Green Arrow and other heroes as he evolved was that he became a more socially, politically active character. And he began to be positioned as a man of the people, or he was supposed to be. Someone looking out for the little guy, unless his ward's on drugs, or other times when it inconvenienced him, which would happen. But Green Arrow is always up for a good virtue signal. So Nate Peterson is here to kind of confirm that image, that idea that Green Arrow is a relatable man of the people. So Nate Peterson is every salt of the earth stereotype one can imagine, down to having his accent written into his lines. And he's oh so impressed with Green Arrow, he puts on his pants one leg at a time, like any man. And then he goes and gets a quiver and a Robin Hood hat. I've been working at Star Tower for over 40 years now, and brother, let me tell you, I seen it all. Well, leastways I thought I had, afore I looked down and saw the darndest thing. Cause there on the scaffold on the 80th floor was one of them superhero fellers. The one they call Green Arrow. Nate seems like a nice guy, but the decision to let him narrate the story is a bit of an odd one. Because a decent chunk of the information that he has to impart in the story, and he will, he has no way to actually know. Using an outsider character can be a fun and interesting story exercise. You can get a unique look at the usual starring protagonist from another point of view. Or you can either reaffirm or call into question some of the things you thought about the title character. So Nate, who works at the tower where Clock King is setting up a bomb, then he finds out that something is awry, on the surface works. It's the execution not so much. Nate witnesses an attempted robbery at the tower stopped by Green Arrow, and he calls the police to help Green Arrow out. And afterwards him and Green Arrow talk, cause Nate says he ain't no snob. The two get to chatting about how long Nate has worked there and about some of the changes that have happened around the tower, such as the digitization of the clock face. It's being replaced with a big digital clock. Nate's lamenting how he feels a bit out of date and like he has less to do and maybe stuff is passing him by, which gives some nice characterization to Nate, but has nothing to do with the overall story. It doesn't parallel Green Arrow, who is not in a similar position. He's a superhero in his prime, not fearing replacement, and it also has nothing to do with the Clock King. As they're talking, Green Arrow notices a new maintenance person and says he feels like he knows him. Arrow laughed, but that workman's face was still nagging at him. I figured anyone who can excite someone like Arrow can't be up to no good. So as I set my mind to keeping an eye on him for Arrow. Ollie didn't ask him to do this. With one small tweak, you can make Nate the villain of this story. It's just someone harassing this poor clock installer who's there to install the digital clock face, as he misattributes his feelings of displacement or discomfort as instructions from Green Arrow, who was just being kind and humoring a bystander and thought he recognized someone but didn't. Thankfully, this worker is the Clock King, so Nate's not just harassing some guy. The Clock King is there to plant a bomb, and Nate feels that his behavior is a little bit suspicious. Now, Nate doesn't reach out to Green Arrow because he can't. He has no way to contact him at all. And the story now wants to give Clock King a new backstory, or well, any backstory, because he didn't have one before. But this isn't something that Nate should or could know. But Ollie does know this. There's a little tagged on narration box about how Green Arrow told Nate all about this at some point later in the future, but he's reiterating it while retelling the story. Here's the backstory. Clock King is finally named. Hallelujah. He's William Tockman. It was very nice of them to give him a Silver Age name to match with his original story. They're honoring his roots. Green Arrow forgot about the Clock King because, as this issue correctly states, he last saw him in Justice League number 5. He hasn't thought about him at all. William's origin is now that he was diagnosed with a terminal illness and given 6 months to live, which sets him into a panic as he was caring for his sister who needed constant care, and he's promised his parents he wouldn't end up in a home. Desperate to keep his promise and feeling like he's dying anyway, Tockman decides to turn to a life of crime. He's just gonna steal some stuff to ensure that his sister will be taken care of for the rest of her life. He called himself the Clock King, figuring if time was running out for him, as the doc said, he'd make use of every second. The clock is meant to be a symbol of time because his is running out. I love how that costume is juxtaposed with this gritty origin. The rest of his first appearance is skimmed over, but it ends the same, him in prison. Only there he learns that he was misdiagnosed. His test results were swapped with someone else. He was never dying. And now his sister Beverly is in a state home. Enraged, he vows revenge against the doctor who misdiagnosed him and Green Arrow. It turns out the doctor who misdiagnosed him lives in the tower where Nate works. So Ollie figures that something is going down, so he rushes back to stop it from happening. He assumes it's a bomb. Clock King seems like the type. He asks Nate if he saw anything suspicious, which he has, hooray, and then enter Bronze Age Clock King. If I thought Era's getup was a mite strange, I ain't got the words for this Clock King feller's clothing. There's a bomb about to go off, and this narration sounds like we're about to veer into something very different. A nice evening at the county fair. Green Arrow tries to reason with Tockman, asking him what about his sister, who's gonna take care of her. But it turns out that Tockman's sister died in the state home. Oh dear, was it poorly run? Was she abused? Did it not have funds? Did she die naturally? What happened? This sounds like something Green Arrow, alleged man of the people, should care about. Arrow lost his money in 1969, so in this era he wasn't exactly flush Oliver Queen. But he could still potentially use his connections to investigate, since his whole persona at the time was championing the underprivileged. That would have been an interesting plot that reframed all of this. Come with me into a world of imagination. Green Arrow is investigating care homes and comes across the death of Tockman's sister. He then at this point learns about Tockman's history, which he didn't know before. He just assumed he was another standard snatch and grab villain. This makes him feel a little guilty, and he goes to talk to Tockman, only to find he's broken down and is seeking revenge. Tockman has gone off the deep end, and now despite the circumstances, it's up to Arrow to stop him. The home can be corrupt, or it could just be run down, and her death could either have been through neglect or through her illness. All of these versions can work, it just depends on what you want to play with. What angle does one want to take? You got many ways you can go. Even sadder though would be if she was still alive and longing to see her brother, who was so embroiled in the shame of breaking their parents' promise that he can't connect with her. He's too far gone. She could become friends with Ollie, giving him an inside look into this world, something he might otherwise not see, giving him a genuine connection as a man of the people, showing it, not telling it. And he would have the extra poignance because it would be with one of his villain's relatives. There you can just have a random character say that he ain't no snob. She died in that damn nursing home, you murdered her. Clock King was crazy, that's for sure. No, he's not. Angry, yes. Crazy, no. Bitter, most definitely. Nate says he can tell Green Arrow is holding back in this fight, but how would he know that? He's just projecting. This section would benefit from Green Arrow's narration, but we'll take Nate's word for it. Maybe he's holding back because he doesn't want to break his hand against Tockman's giant clock face mask. Tockman is willing to die up there if it means that the Doctor and Arrow will die too, so Arrow ends up knocking him out and disarms the bomb. And despite Arrow having figured out 90% of this by himself, he says that Nate is the real hero. Yes sirree Bob, that era is one heck of a good friend he is. The end! Okay, Tockman stuff first. It's fascinating to see the first story reimagined with such dark bones. It makes the Clock King really tragic, but it also traps him a bit because he doesn't have much of a motive to continue being a criminal, except, well, he has nothing else to do. Because when he shows up later, he's just pulling standard crimes. At least for the first little bit, pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths. This story does give him a reason to hate Green Arrow, but it works a bit better as a one and done deal. It's potentially going harder than the original story warranted. The story is fairly solid, but the execution lets it down. The commitment to Nate as a narrator is admirable, and they find ways to make him find out things that he needs to, but it's a bit clunky. It ends up taking away from some of the depth that the story could have given Green Arrow, and it could have really built up the Green Arrow Tockman thing. It got to the point where I was wondering if Nate was a fan or a real person. I looked into it, but I couldn't find anything. So if anybody knows and he was a real person or just an insert, let me know. This story takes what seemed like a pretty standard encounter for Ollie back in the day and pumps it full of pathos. As mentioned earlier, this could be something that really shocked Green Arrow. And Green Arrow is a hero who is prone to introspection. The thing is, the new stuff about Tockman has to be relayed through Ollie anyway, even if it's indirect. So it's really hammering home that Green Arrow is a relatable thing at the expense of some other plot devices that could have happened. Still, I will take 1,000 Man of the People over what sometimes passes for relatable commentary. Here's an example from 2022. Half the city thinks Police Commissioner Beckett got what he deserved when he was murdered. The other half thinks Man Ray is some BLM assassin of the socialist woke mob. Regaining the confidence of the people and the trust for the department is a difficult needle to thread, as I'm sure you know, Commissioner Montoya. What I know, Beckett was racist, sexist, and homophobic. Now you're trying to virtue signal by offering the position of commissioner to a queer female representing Latin... Okay, real talk. I am Batman number 11, using a word that a significant amount of people in the actual community consider insulting and some an outright slur. Bold play, one that I will not be partaking in. You know what's really interesting is that dialogue has the exact same energy as some from Hard Traveling Heroes. Here's an example, but you know I'm just waiting anytime I get to talk about Hard Traveling Heroes. Like what you've seen? I hope you enjoyed playing superhero out there. I hope it did a lot of good for your ego. Easy, you've no right to yell at me. I have a job, I do it. Seems I've heard that line before. At the Nazi war trials. I want to ask the ring slinger a question, Mr. Green Arrow. I've been reading about you, how you work for the blue skins, and how on a planet someplace you helped out the orange skins, and you done considerable for the purple skins, only their skins you never bothered with, the black skins. I want to know how come. Answer me that, Green Lantern. I can't. I mean, I could, and I could say that I've saved the entire Earth. But I'm not going to! same energy, and I'm sure it will age just as well. The Clock King is an interesting case. It's a concept where might see potential in the base idea, but it manifests in different ways. My favorite to date has been the Temple Fugate version from BTAS, that's Batman the Animated Series, which spawned the Tem version post-Crisis, but then Tem got weird with Ravager, and no thank you. Do you have a favorite Clock King? What do you think of his angsty origin? What do you think of his OG costume? Do you agree with my story suggestions for the Bronze Age? Or no, you love Nate. We are Nate. I like Nate, he just didn't need to be there in that story. Tell me things down below, and while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it. I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.